Hi everyone, Sue Matsuki here with another Sue's Muse for Nightlife Exchange. Today I am bringing a gentleman that has been called a triple threat, who has soaring vocals and has had the adjectives of spectacular and charismatic, all from major press. I just met him down in Puerta Vallarta at the Act Two PV events, and I fell in love with him and I wanted to talk to him one-on-one. Please welcome Perry Laylon Ojeda, yes?
Beta, yes, thank you.
Good. My Spanish isn't as bad as I thought it was. Perry, thank you so much for getting up early to come talk to me. You're out in California, right?
Yes, I live in Los Angeles. I have for about 15 years now. It's been quite a little bit of time. I still think of myself in my spine as a New Yorker, but the the race is on. I'm almost have been in California as long as I was a New Yorker. So
That's an interesting bridge to cross. My husband is Japanese, and that we came to the point where he lived here longer than he actually lived in his own country. And that's also kind of just a different way of life because New York and LA are somewhat similar and very different at the same time.
yes.
So you had a big career here in New York. You started as someone called you a triple threat, but I would question that. You're an actor, you're a singer, you're a dancer, you're a voiceover actor. You've done TV and films, so you're more than just a triple threat, but that's what they used to call you back in the day on Broadway. And I think I read that you started in the West End and then came over to New York and ended up on Broadway. Tell us a little bit about your tenure.
Well, I actually started in the chorus on Broadway in a musical called Blood Brothers, actually on the national tour. And then I moved into the Broadway company. I worked with some terrific people then, like Petula Clark and David Cassidy and um, others, along Helen Reddy along the way, all that stuff. And then I became a little bit more serious about my acting and started in the performance art world downtown at La Mama and PS 122 and got to know a little bit of that crowd. And I started to take some workshops and work a little bit more on my own solo writing.
Mhm.
And through that, I began to find my own voice. And I started sort of as a stand-up routine, and then it became a solo play. And I always enjoyed singing. And among that performance art world, I came across Ira Sif and Le Grand Chena Opera Company, of which David Sabella was a member, the producer of Act Two PV,
Mhm.
how it all comes together slowly, eventually. Um, but I got some attention, and some casting people saw me from the public theater, and I got the audition for On the Town, and then I was featured as the lead in that revival in '98, and then after that, I got the opportunity to move to Ireland and London with a
Oh,
play
cool. So it was after you made your Broadway debut that
after I
you.
made my Broadway debut, and then I worked on that play by Frank McGuinness, a
Mhm.
Dolly West Kitchen. It started at the Irish National Theatre, the Abbey in Dublin, and then the play was so successful that we moved to London for about 6 months. There was talk about bringing it into into New York, but 9/11 happened, and
Yeah.
all our lives changed, and things shifted. And then I got another opportunity to return to Broadway in a play by Nora Ephron called Imaginary Friends, which was not such a big long run, but it got me back in on the boards in New York. And then I did a play off Broadway with Charles Bush and did some other tours and things, and had always intended to move to Los Angeles. And about 2012 or so, 2010 in there somewhere, I moved to LA.
So question, I worked at the Metropolitan Opera and I remember the very first time I walked on stage and looked up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm at the Metropolitan Opera and I'm on the stage. Do you remember the moment of your first Broadway step on and looking up? Did you have, I guess you were in your character mode, but did you have that moment of, oh my God, look where I am?
Well,
Did
my
that happen
Broadway
to you?
debut. was at the Music Box Theater, which is a very storied old theater originally owned by Sam Harris and
Hmm.
Irving Berlin, the old uh, famous Broadway producer, and of course, Irving Berlin. Everybody knows Irving Berlin.
Yes.
But knowing that history and the people that came before me, um, and forgive me, who's responsible for Natural Woman? The name escapes me at the moment.
Oh, Carol, is it
Carol
Carol
King.
King? Yeah.
Carol King was performing the lead in Blood Brothers at the time when I was in the replacement cast, and particularly for a long run musical like that. You see my husband Brett
My
walking.
husband does that sometimes too. He'll open the door and I'm like, oh.
He's getting ready for work.
Uh,
Anyway, um, at Blood Brothers with those long run companies,
yeah.
the when somebody comes as a replacement, everybody's a little grumpy. They have to get up early. It's a two-show day often, and you're walking in, and it adds a lot of extra work for the resident companies. So people were a little grumpy. I didn't take it personally,
Okay.
but to me it was a big deal. I was
Of course it
performing at
is.
Broadway, and I'm heading up to my fifth floor dressing room way in the rafters of the music box. And as I pass the star dressing room, Carol King stops me, and in her beautiful Bronx accent, which I'm going to butcher now, she says, "Oh, so you made it to Broadway. Good for you.
Aw.
Dreams come true." And she said it with such kindness
Yeah.
and such encouragement that it made me feel like I had really, I mean, it was Carol King.
It was
So
Carol King.
clearly I had arrived
Yeah,
somewhere.
that's awesome.
And
So I
others,
want to talk a little bit about a year ago, you're diagnosed with Parkinson's.
yes, I
Holy
was.
God. I mean, you're a young man. It's not something you think people your age are going to be afflicted with. Walk me through then till now. How did you deal with the diagnosis and process it to get to the point where just 1 year later, I get to see this magnificent performance down in PV with you explaining a little bit about the journey that you've been on, but talk to the people out here a little bit about what that journey's been like for you.
Well, my Parkinson's journey really begins about 5 or 6 years ago, when some pretty mysterious symptoms started. Now I recognize them as
Mhm.
sort of normal Parkinson's system symptoms, sleeplessness and the occasional mispronunciation of being able to control all the muscles of breathing and um, phrasing as a singer, and a little pitch problems were coming up. Because I wasn't able to breathe properly. It's all about, for people that don't know, Parkinson's is a deficiency in dopamine. Your brain stops being able to process and make dopamine, which is the hormone that it communicates to control muscular action, which is where the tremor comes from. Or often you'll see facial masking with people, and there's a bunch of other symptoms like very unglamorous constipation, falling, and um, of course, we all know Michael J. Fox, and we see him tremor and fall, tremble and fall. Um, and I didn't realize that's what was the beginning of what was happening to me. I was performing on a cruise ship. I did a series of cruise ship concerts, both for some two different lines. And one was a very sort of pop centric uh, kind of repertoire of music, which was very challenging vocally. And as the contract progressed, generally speaking, I have had the experience until this contract of the different genres of being able to sing, your stamina increases and it becomes easier and easier. And that wasn't my experience. It got harder and harder, and I was sleeping less and less. And I thought, well, I am a little older than most of the young people in the cast. There, I was a 10 or 15 year difference. And I thought, I'm sure it's just age. And then I got pulled onto another line, and this was more of a book show experience. So it was a little less taxing vocally, but again, the same experience. And I had a self-winding watch on my right hand I used to wear all the time. And one of the other symptoms of early Parkinson's is you sort of lose mobility on one side first, and my watch that was self-winding kept stopping because I would forget to walk in opposition. My arm would just hang. And again, I thought, well, this is an odd experience, but it just must be age. And again, I was getting more and more notes of like, watch your pitch and you're dropping the end of the phrase and I can't really understand you. Can you articulate a little bit more? And I
God, that must
came
have
to
been
the
a
decision.
nightmare.
It was terrible. I thought I'm really coming to the end of my experience as a professional artist. And understand, I've been performing since I was a little boy.
Mhm.
I went to a performing arts high school. I graduated from the University of Michigan musical theater program. So I've spent my whole life focused on being a a musical theater performer, not just an actor, but someone who expresses themselves through their voice and through dance and as well as acting. So to lose that facility, I felt like I was losing my identity.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so it was very hard. And then I had a callback for, I'll never forget, here in Los Angeles, there aren't a lot of really top notch. The top notch theater opportunities are pretty rare and they're highly competitive. And there's just a few theaters, the Geffen, the Pasadena Playhouse, South Coast Rep, the Amundsen Downtown Center Theater Group. You know, it's as opposed to 30 theaters like the Broadway scene, it's really just sort of like a half dozen.
Mhm.
And I had a callback for uh, Sunday in the Park with George, and I made it all the way to the end. And I'm standing there singing my song, holding my score, singing very complicated Sondheim. Sunday, counting my little face off, and the score started to shake in my hand,
Mhm.
and I couldn't stop the tremor, and I had no idea what was going on. And they thought, well, are you nervous? Would you like to try
Yeah,
it
yeah.
again? Are you, and
Which is worse than letting people know that you have something, right? I mean,
well,
gee.
I didn't know. I didn't
Right,
understand what
right.
that this was what was happening. So I did try it again and I couldn't still the tremor. I
Mhm.
just sort of collapsed and it was a terrible professional embarrassment. I went to doctors and they'd said my first GP was like, you need to calm down and meditate. You're stressed. Um, and
Well,
I
again,
kept,
because no one thinks someone your age is going to be,
of course.
stricken with this.
So I was insistent that this was. I had the idea. I just had the notion that something else was wrong.
Mhm.
So I insisted that they send me to a neurologist, which of course with insurance, it's a long process to you can't just be
Right.
referred to a neurologist. It was MRIs and tests and they finally agreed with me that I was a good candidate to go to a neurologist to see what was wrong because they couldn't diagnose it. And he diagnosed me within minutes.
Wow.
Of course, there were more tests involved to confirm the diagnosis, but he was like, "Yeah, you have Parkinson's," which to me felt like both a death sentence and a relief
Right.
because now I knew that I wasn't imagining things,
Right.
but I also maybe could take some actions to slow progression.
Mhm.
And that wasn't an immediate decision. I thought I would have to retire.
Mhm.
And uh, because so many other terrific performers have not retired but receded, like Linda Ronstadt or bless his soul, Neil Diamond, or even Liza Minnelli,
Mhm.
all share a Parkinson's diagnosis with me. Um,
But you show up down in PV with a beautiful cabaret show. What was the inspiration to say, okay, I have this diagnosis. I've been living with it. It's been a curse and a blessing because I've learned things about my life. How did you get yourself on stage now to test the waters? I think that Mark Hartman booked you. Did Mark was the one that
yes.
called you?
Uh, Again, it's sort of a weird route. I I was asked to do a reading of a new screenplay from a friend, a neighbor. I live in Hollywood, North Hollywood, so my friends and neighbors are big fancy schmancy pants artists, always doing this and that and other things. So I was asked to read, I don't know, three or four roles in this crazy, wonderful screenplay. And it was sort of a parade of accents because they were all these different comedy characters. So I was kind of just having a blast. And Carrie Safran, this brilliant dialect coach, whom I knew from New York, um, says to me, "Gosh, I haven't heard you act in a while, and you really seem to know what you're doing. Good for you. What have you been up to? I know that I know you from your New York stuff, all your musical theater." And I said, "Well, I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. I'm not singing much anymore, and I don't really know what I'm doing." And she says, "Oh, well, I have this new voice teacher, um, Andrew Byrne, and his specialty is dealing with people who have brain function issues. In fact, that's what he does. Teaches vocal drills to trick your
I
brain,
never heard of that. That's amazing.
yeah, to adjust. And since dopamine isn't so anyway, I thought, what the hell? I have nothing to lose.
Mhm.
So I did an online lesson with him, a couple online lessons, and then he happened to come to LA. I was so encouraged by the online lesson. In between time, Mark called me pretty much out of the blue and said, "I've lost an artist. I know you have your cruise ship, and I had done this act that you saw
Mhm.
about Betty Condon and Adolph Green at 54 Below." But Mark was never available. He did all the arrangements and a musical directed it, but he never played the show. I did it with my band on the ship, and then I did it at 54 Below with another wonderful musical director. But he had never played his own arrangements, and we thought this is a perfect opportunity. He can finally play the arrangements, and I felt positive enough having worked with Andrew Byrne and then returned to my old voice teacher, Ira Siff from La Grande Shana, um, to be able to, I said, well, I think I can do it. And I wasn't sure, but I thought I could.
Mhm.
I thought I could. And then Andrew had happened to be in Los Angeles, and I took the whole act, and we booked a couple hours and we played through the whole thing. And he said, "I think you really can do this." And I said, "I think I can too."
Yeah.
And and
When you shared with us that this was your first time back on stage,
yes,
I'm getting welled up right now because it was a very special moment. We did talkbacks after each of us did a show. We did talkbacks with the people who were participating in the classes. And when none of us knew, none of us could possibly know how recent that you were officially diagnosed and then how soon it was and how brave. And it was really brave of you to risk it, but then you were in such a safe, loving environment. I felt like it was the best possible place. And thank you, Mark Hartman, for inviting me and definitely for inviting you because now you know you can do it. You've had a safe
yes,
place to try it out and you were wonderful. You were really wonderful. The only
goodness.
thing that you could tell was, Perry had a little bit of a tremor, but then he explained that when that happens, he reaches out and touches the mic stand to ground himself. That's the word you use. You ground yourself, right?
You
So,
grasp something, it
or put
overcomes
your hand on the
you.
piano. That was the only
That's
two
the
things.
tremor. Yeah, it's what they do in physical therapy for Parkinson's patients. You grasp a ball, and that
Mhm.
immediately stills the tremor because you're giving it's a resting tremor. That's what they call it medically in Parkinson's. So if you're in action, it's like the fact that Parkinson's patients can ride a bike. They can't walk, but they can ride a bike.
Yeah.
Or there was an article in the New York Times a week or two ago about Parkinson's patients doing rock climbing because if you command the muscles, which is sort of what Andrew was teaching me, if you command it, then it will do what you want it to. If you can relax, don't get lost in well, it's not the way it used to feel. How's it going to feel now?
So listen, we're at time, but I want to keep you. I want to close
Okay.
down this interview because we always say that people don't have an attention span past 15, 20 minutes, but I want to keep you and I want to do a part two with you because there's so many questions I didn't get to ask you. So
Great.
stick with us. And below this interview, there'll be a second link for the second interview. I'm going to close this out saying thank you for joining us for Sue's Muse and thank you, Perry.
Bye, everyone.
Um, but click the next one because you're going to want to hear the rest of it from this wonderful, wonderful man. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a few minutes.